So we're really delighted to have you all come for this special lecture on Jain Manuscripts, presented in collaboration with the Temple. So earlier this year, I think many of you, I see so many familiar faces, many of you were here for our first event celebrating the establishment of the Gyan and Kanchan Jain Chair in Jain Studies, which is a huge landmark for us at UTM that's been made possible through the generosity of the Gyan and Kanchan Jain family and their vision. Their commitment to advancing Jain studies is truly inspiring. We're so proud to carry their important work forward. I also want to tell you a little bit about what this gift has created, which is the position of an endowed chair. And we have a lecture today by our first endowed chair in Jain Studies, Professor Christine Chojnacki. So an endowed chair is a very, very special academic appointment. It's not just any professor. The chair, it affirms UTM's role as a global leader in the study of Jainism, enriching scholarship, and also expanding community engagement, shaping the future of the field of Jain studies. Chair holders have deep experience and expertise in advancing knowledge. They impact practice, and they influence public conversations like the one today. Our friends, the Jain family, along with the chair, also established a collaboration fund. So collaboration, community collaboration is something that is very much at the center of what we're trying to do. We want to build meaningful connections between the university and the Jain community, and we want academic research to be shared with everyone, informed by lived experience. So we look forward to many opportunities to foster dialogue, deepen understanding, and bring people together. Now, before we begin today's lecture, I have the great pleasure of inviting our Vice President and Principal, Alexandra Gillespie, to say a few words.
Thank you so much, RJ. I'm really delighted to be here. I want to begin by reiterating the heartfelt thanks you just heard to the Jain family for the generous gift that established the Gyan and Kanchan Jain Chair in Jain Studies and its collaboration fund. Their contribution is already having a positive impact, creating new opportunities like this very opportunity for teaching, research, and community engagement focused on Jainism. I myself have benefited and learned new things about Jainism just today. I want to also note that this chair is UTM, U of T Mississauga's first endowed chair, not just in Jain Studies, but in any humanities subject. As such, it signifies our commitment to strengthening fields of research and teaching that enable cultural understanding, critical inquiry, and human flourishing. And I think these things are very important right now. I am someone with an academic background in the humanities. I started out in English literature, and I've ended up in global book history. As a result, this is especially meaningful to me. I know firsthand how these disciplines help us to interpret the world, challenge assumptions, connect across cultures and generations, and turn things like scientific innovation into social as well as economic prosperity. This chair is a significant step forward for our whole university. It also provides a powerful reminder of how one act of generosity can lift a field of study to new heights. That's the spirit of U of T's whole Defy Gravity campaign, a bold vision for pushing boundaries, reimagining possibilities, and investing in the people and ideas that will shape a better future. The Jain family support is a wonderful example of how philanthropy can elevate an institution, empower students, scholars, and communities alike. Beyond the impact on teaching and research, their generosity is helping us to create spaces where academics and community come together through gatherings like today's. I want to say that I'm particularly excited for this afternoon's event, which focuses on manuscripts. This is a subject that I explore in my own research. I want to say, as you're about to hear, and I think hopefully nobody from the Jain community would doubt this, manuscripts, books, written words, they matter. They offer a window into the lives of past generations. They preserve voices, ideas, faith, cultural practice that might otherwise be lost and cease to benefit our world today. We need them. I am eager to learn more about the Jain manuscript tradition and to support the chair in advancing research that enhance our understanding and appreciation of this rich cultural legacy. But now I'm going to turn things back to RJ. We just pop up and down because he is going to introduce our inaugural chairholder and today's lecturer. Thank you, Christine. Really looking forward to it.
Thank you, Alex. So it's my great pleasure to introduce today's speaker. Professor Chojnacki, Christine Chojnacki, joined UTM in January as the inaugural Gyan and Kanchan Jain Chair in Jain Studies. She is already doing a great deal to promote Jain Studies at the university, teaching undergraduate courses. I've told, I think, many of you that I've been learning quite a bit about Jainism because we read together all the time. So it's just wonderful to have Professor Chojnacki with us. She previously taught at the University of Lyon in France, where she was a professor of Indian studies. Her research focuses on Jain sources in Sanskrit and Prakrit, and she has received numerous accolades for her work, including the Palmes Académiques, one of France's highest honors for contributions to education and culture. This afternoon, Professor Chojnacki will share insights into a central focus of her research, Jain manuscripts. Now, as you know, Jainism is one of the world's richest manuscript cultures. Yet only a small fraction of these texts and images have been published. Professor Chojnacki is committed to ensuring these manuscripts are studied, preserved, and recognized for their place in the broader history of South Asian knowledge. In her lecture today, she will explore how Jain manuscripts serve the Jain community, their importance to global cultural heritage, and the challenges we face in preserving them for future generations. And following the lecture, there'll be time for a brief question and answer period, so please note any questions that you have. Now, please join me in welcoming Professor Christine Chojnacki.
So, I am greatly honored to have been chosen as the holder of the Gyan and Kanchan Jain Chair of Jain Studies, and I am delighted to be here for an event that brings together the university and the Jain community. Thank you all for being with us today. Before we begin, I would like to express my gratitude to Professor Alexandra Gillespie, Vice President and Principal of the University of Toronto, for kindly joining us for this special occasion. I would also like to extend my deepest thanks to Professor Ajay Rao for his continued engagement, his warm introduction, and for presenting the subject of the lecture I will deliver in a few minutes. Last but not least, I am truly grateful to the university team, Kirsten, Ben, and Marai, for their dedicated help and support in preparing for this event. Finally, my thanks go to my friend Paul, whose voice you'll hear on several occasions during our time together. Once again, thank you all for being here today. I must admit, I feel a bit humbled, but it's a pleasure to share this moment with you. So now we'll begin. But where is the? Ah, sorry. So, the Jain are renowned for their long-standing role in producing and preserving manuscripts, creating a legacy of some of India's most remarkable illustrated works. In today's talk, I invite you to join me to explore the fascinating world of Jain manuscript. Through images and examples, we'll address the following key questions. So what is a Jain manuscript from its conception to its preservation? Then how do manuscripts serve the Jain community? Then why are Jain manuscripts essential to the world's heritage? And then what challenges must we overcome to safeguard these treasuries? In fact, these issues are all closely connected. Why is that? Undoubtedly, producing a manuscript is a complex, time-consuming, and costly process. So, if the Jaina community devoted such care to this task, it was because it held deep religious and cultural meaning for them. This deep respect for writing helped them in turn preserve knowledge lost in other Indian traditions and pass on beautiful literary works. But today, since many of these texts are written in Prakrit, they are at risk of being lost or forgotten. The challenge now is to continue preserving them and to make these treasures of India's heritage known to the world. Now, our first question is this: what is a Jain manuscript? To answer this question, we'll look at three main aspects of the Jain manuscript tradition. First, we explore how manuscripts were written, the materials like palm leaf or handmade paper, the natural inks, and the tools used by gifted scribes. Next, we turn to how they were illuminated with vibrant colors and detailed paintings that brought Jain stories and teachings to life. Then we'll see how these manuscripts were protected with beautifully crafted covers, special storage boxes, and the careful preservation work done in bandars, the traditional libraries that have passed on Jain knowledge for centuries. Finally, we'll look how various artisans contributed their skills to carry on this manuscript tradition. In India, due to the country's humid climate, there are very few manuscripts which have survived before the end of the first millennium. In the case of Jainism, we have only two examples dated from the 6th century, one in Kashmir on birch bark and one in central India on palm leaf. Birch bark remains an exception among Jain manuscripts. The two principal writing materials are palm leaf and paper. Indeed, palm leaf, fan palm, had several advantages over birch bark. It was more resistant and elastic, with robust fibers better suited to tropical climates. It was sensitive to damage, but could be protected effectively through natural treatments. And it was more durable and generally less expensive. This is why it was preferred and remained in use, particularly for Jain texts, at least until the 13th century. As you can see on the slide on the bottom, the material is easily recognizable by its long and narrow format, typically around 37 centimeters by 3 centimeters. Later, for reasons of cost and practicality, paper began to replace palm leaves as a main writing material. Paper could be produced quickly and in large quantities, using fibers from plants such as hemp, cotton, or mulberry. As you can see on the slide on the top, it also offered a smoother, more manageable writing surface, usually around 15 centimeters by 25 centimeters. Now I'll talk to you about inks, which can be black, red, or gold, as you can see on the manuscripts. To explain how it is produced, it is getting technical, but it's important and interesting because it demonstrates the complexity and high artistry behind book production. The most commonly used ink in the Indian manuscript tradition was carbon black ink. It was made from soot, produced by the incomplete burning of oil, wood, and resin, and mixed with a binder like gum arabic, bean gum, or even just water. This type of ink is extremely durable. It resists both light and humidity, and it stays black and clear for centuries. Because of its reliability, it became the standard ink for writing manuscripts across India. Red pigment typically came from substances like mercury oxide, also known as cinnabar, or red iron oxide, which we know as red ochre. Red ink served specific purposes. Et puis après, it marked the ends of chapters, outlined borders, and was often used to draw circles and straight lines, especially in yantras, the ritual diagrams found in many Jain manuscripts. Gold ink was also used, but only for the most special manuscripts. This ink was made by grinding fine gold powder taken from gold leaf or tiny gold grains and mixing it with a binder like gum arabic. Sometimes, to get the right consistency, water or honey was added, along with small amounts of sugar, aloe, or starch to keep the mixture stable. Gold ink was reserved for sacred or decorative purposes for several reasons. First, it was extremely costly. Second, reading gold or ink could cause eye strain, so it was meant more for display than for practical reading. And lastly, mistakes made with gold ink were hard to fix. Since ink was carefully prepared using special and often expensive ingredients, it needed to be stored in ink pots for long-term use. Old examples haven't survived, but I do have a few modern ones I show you on this slide. I'll now show you some of the implements used to prepare the manuscripts in its final form. First, the reed pen called boru. It is made from natural materials like bamboo or cinnamon wood. Second, the bow compass called prakar. Scribes used it to draw circles and curved lines on manuscript pages, especially for yantra, geometric diagrams, or decorative borders. It is simple but impressively effective. Third, the line ruler called yugavala is often crafted by ironsmiths in the region around Jodhpur. It is made by joining two thin strips of iron shaped like a fork or a spearhead with a narrow gap between them. Ink is placed into this gap, and when used together with a ruler, it creates precise, even lines across the manuscript page. Fourth, the long foot ruler, known as the kambi, is cleverly designed. It has narrow slits running along both of its long edges. This helps absorb any extra ink, preventing smudges and keeping lines sharp and clean. But that's not all. The kambi also protects the manuscript while reading. Scribes would place it along the line they were reading to guide their eyes and to stop their hands or even sweat from damaging the delicate folio. Finally, I want to draw your attention to a special tool, one that gives Jain manuscripts their remarkably neat and uniform look, especially in the Jain Nagari script. This is the ruler board you can see on the right of the slide, and it is used to create perfectly spaced lines on the writing surface. Here is how it works. First, the board, usually made of wood, is cut to the size of the manuscript page. Then, small holes are pierced at equal intervals along the top and bottom edges. A string is threaded through these holes and tied tightly at the back. It is like a kind of grid. To keep these threads in place, the surface is coated with a thin layer of rice paste, tamarind paste, or any other sticky colored mixture. Once it dries, the board is ready. Next, sheets of paper cut to match the board or gently pressed onto the string side. With one hand holding the sheet ready, the other hand presses it softly across the threads. And so you can see on the left, even if it is not so clear, there are small lines, faint impressions of lines that are a guide for the scribe. And then writing begins, and you can see the result on the right, how each line is perfectly aligned, giving Jain manuscripts their precision, elegance, and unmistakable sense of order. And that is not something that you see otherwise. We'll now look how Jain texts are visually organized on the manuscript page. There are three layout styles, each with its own logic and purpose. First, as you can see on this slide, we have the simplest format, a single block of text with no commentary. It is clean, direct, and focused entirely on the main content. Second, we come to what is known the tripata layout, so three because that is three, also in English. Here the main text appears in the center of the page, while commentaries are added above and below. I can show you with my, so that there are the spaces for commentary. This creates a vertical structure guiding the reader's eyes from the core text, what is the most important, to the interpretations given to the text by later commentators. Finally, we have the most complex and visually striking format, that is the Panchapata layout, so that means 5 parts. In this style, the main text is again placed in the center, but it is surrounded by commentary not just above and below like the other type, but also on left and right, as you can see now. This creates a kind of frame text with layers of meaning radiating outward from the center. Illuminated manuscripts fascinate with their wonderful colors. And here too, it is remarkable how much craftsmanship goes into the result. The process of illuminating Jain manuscripts required not just artistic talent, but careful preparation and great patience. First, it is important to note, no mineral color was ever used in its raw form. Before it could be applied, the pigment had to be purified to remove 2 unwanted elements, sand and humus. How did they prepare it? The color earth was mixed with water, the heavy sand settled at the bottom, with the peat and mold that were skimmed off the top. Before the pigments itself could sink, the colored water was quickly poured into another vessel. This process was repeated again and again until the color was completely free of impurities. Once cleaned, the earth was dried in the sun, and only then it was ready to be used for painting. I chose to explain the preparations of 3 pigments, each for its particular significance. Reds because there are several reds, blue because it was a later addition, and gold also a rare one. So red is a color that appears in many shades, as you can see on the top of the slide. Each shade of red was produced from a different mineral. Red ochre was the most common. It was ground on a stone for an entire day, then washed again and again to produce a rich, pure red or orange. Red lead created a slightly yellowish red tone. It was made by roasting white lead in open air until it deepened in color. The result powder was then ground in water for several days before it could be stored and used. And then there was vermilion or ingola, a bright vivid red. This came from crude cinnabar, which was ground in a mortar with sugared water or lime juice or mixed with gum. The thick paste was shaped into tablets and then dried for later use. The color blue azure, called Rajavarta, was a late and rare addition, usually mainly on paper and not on palm leaves. This striking blue was made from lapis lazuli, a precious stone imported from Afghanistan or Iran. Because of this, that was very expensive. Besides, the extraction process was delicate. If done incorrectly, the pigment would come to a dull gray rather than the brilliant blue that painters wanted. So producing this color required special skills and great care. Finally, the focus turns to gold, a later addition to the palette of Jain Manuscripts illumination. Indeed, gold was almost never used in manuscripts during the 12th and 13th century. It started to appear cautiously in the 14th century and then was increasingly used from the 15th century onward. So how was it prepared?
According to the Shilparatna, gold leaves were at first reduced to very tiny pieces, and then mixed with the sand and water, they were thoroughly levigated in a smooth stone mortar. After the gold leaves were reduced to powder, it was put in a glass cup and the sand and dust removed by the washing process. When the powder was cleaned of all impurities, it was ready to be used with the glue. After the application of gold, the surface was burnished with a boar's tusk to impart gloss to the color.
The story of the protection of the manuscript begins with the traveling monk, carrying manuscript from village to village. To protect these sacred texts during daily use, Jain monks take special covers called patu, which are made of a variety of materials, most commonly wood, but sometimes silver or gold. These are like book jackets used while delivering discourses or studying texts in public. They serve two important purposes. First, they protect the manuscript from perspiration on the hands. Second, they stop loose pages from being blown away by the wind, especially during outdoor readings. And when the monk pauses to recite or simply rests, the manuscript is placed on a tripod stand, usually crafted from teak or sandalwood. Now, when the manuscripts are not being used, they are carefully wrapped in cloth. This cloth is called a bandan, usually made from cotton or silk, and it helps shield the manuscript from dust, moisture, and wear. There is also a seasonal cover used during the monsoon, known as kavali. The kavali is woven from thin bamboo strips, almost like a curtain, and lined with cotton or silk on the inside. This inner lining helps protect the delicate folios from monsoon humidity, which was a real threat to these ancient texts. For long-term protection, manuscripts are stored in boxes called dabada. These boxes guard against climate damage, harmful insects, and handling over time. In addition, the caretakers of these manuscripts had traditional knowledge. They knew exactly which substances to use to keep them safe and well preserved, as you will see now. So around the boxes, you'd often find godavaj powder made from an herb with a strong camphor smell, myrobalan, neem leaves, paper powder, or even cinnamon oil. Each of these substances serves as a natural repellent, shielding the manuscripts from harm, whether caused by rats, termites, or mold. And finally, where are all these manuscripts kept? In traditional libraries called bandas, many of which were established as early as the 11th century. These are sacred spaces where generations of monks and scholars preserve the literary and spiritual heritage of Jainism. On the screen, you see some of the oldest and most famous, that is the one of Patan and Jaisalmer. Every stage of a creation of a manuscript, from preparing the leaves to writing and illumination, brought together a community of artisans. Each played a part in bringing this beautiful object to life. The preparers, the copyists, and the painters, whose roles we'll now explore. The tradition of palm leaves begins with the artistry of those craftsmen who transformed the humble palm leaf into a surface for writing. Before writing could even begin, the leaves had to go through an extensive preparation process. One common method was to hang the leaf and apply a paste made from turmeric, which acted as a natural preservative. Another technique, the leaves were first dried in the sun and then buried in ponds, mud, or silt for 10 to 15 days. Afterward, they were cleaned and again treated with turmeric paste to protect the surface. Finally, they were cut into long rectangular strips, ready to become a manuscript. The making of paper manuscripts, too, required great care and preparation. It followed a few key steps. First, the raw material was stripped of any unwanted components and broken down into fibers. These fibers were bleached, beaten into pulp, and shaped into flat sheets. Once the paper was formed, it needed to be burnished, that is, smoothed, so the pen could glide easily, and the ink would not blot. As you can see on the right part of the slide, burnisher was of several types. Usually, what was used was a large agate stone to create a smooth, polished surface, perfect for writing. But also, a large shell could serve the same purpose. And a more sophisticated tool was the dog-tooth burnisher, which was used not only to polish the paper, but also to give the gilded letters a finer shine. And lastly, there is a very interesting tool, the powder shaker. It is a round vessel with small perforations on top, rather like a miniature sugar shaker. It is used to sprinkle very fine powders across a surface, and the purpose depends on the type of powder and when it is used. Before burnishing, very fine powders such as chalk, gypsum, or starch are applied to reduce tackiness, absorb excess moisture, or make the burnishing process smoother and more even. After burnishing, polishing powders like rouge, tripoli, or pumice are used to refine the polish, absorb any remaining moisture, and protect the shine. When the palm leaf or paper had been prepared, the task passed to another group of artisans, the copyists, who came from diverse backgrounds. Some copyists were monks themselves or lay devotees, deeply committed to preserving the Jain teachings. Others came from families in which the art of writing had been passed down from generation to generation. Training often began in childhood, whether at home, in a patshala, or under the guidance of a monk. Because to become a copyist, one needed a lot of technical skills. To begin with, the copyists had to master the writing technique we have mentioned earlier. Another challenge for the copyist was leaving the right amount of space for the painter's illustration, as you can see on the slide in the bottom. So they had to write and just leave the space for that miniature. Focus now moves to the artisans who created the paintings. In many cases, the art of manuscript painting was passed down with specific communities from father to son. Each artist had a specialized role. One prepared pigment, another drew out the outlines, other filled in the colors, and finally gold powder was applied and burnished to bring out the shine. Together, they worked like a finely tuned orchestra. But Jain painters were more than craftsmen. Their art had both a devotional and didactic purpose. It was meant to teach and to transmit sacred knowledge. They illustrated with great care episodes from the lives of the Jinas, scenes of renunciation, previous birth, and ultimate liberation, as we will see in a moment. To sum up, all the steps from the leaf to the painting remind us that producing a Jain manuscript was never a casual task. Even when there were no gold embellishment or elaborate borders, producing a single manuscript remained a highly skilled, time-consuming, and expensive undertaking, one that combined devotion, discipline, and deep artistic knowledge. So when we consider, on the one hand, that producing a manuscript required so many skills and was such a time-consuming process, since the writing alone amounted to no more than about 60 lines a day. And on the other hand, how few people had access to written culture. The sheer number of manuscripts that were nonetheless created and carefully preserved tells us something important. Manuscripts held a special significance within the Jain community, and now we will see why. The deep significance of manuscript protection in the Jain tradition can be appreciated from several key perspectives. At the heart of Jain Dharma lies the gift of knowledge, Gyan, regarded as both an intellectual and spiritual act. However, preserving and transmitting this knowledge through manuscripts was more than a way to preserve the written word. It was also a means of connecting monks and lay people, allowing Jain values to reach daily life. Manuscript production then became a shared cultural practice that united Jain monks and lay people in devotion to learning, preservation, and spiritual growth. And you see the different point we will see now, the gift of knowledge, and then the teaching of Jain principles and the cohesion of the Jain community. So I will explore these key ideas with you, all through examples and insights drawn directly from the texts themselves. For instance, at the end of many manuscripts, we find reflections on the importance of knowledge in the Jain tradition. This is the place where monks often recorded details about their lineage or about the family of the merchant who sponsored the copy, and so also they explain why they would produce this copy, and we find the following. First, that the gift of knowledge is very important and is more important than other forms of gift. And I take an example from one passage.
The gift of money is very good in this world if it is spent on knowledge, such as the teaching of the excellent Jinas. Feeling that his life would soon come to an end, Siddha's father called his son and advised him to spend his money on copying books rather than on organizing pilgrimages. Thereupon, when his father died, the son paid for more than 100,000 lines to be copied down in 10 purifying books.
Second, it is also the best means to attain deliverance.
The omniscient Jinas also say that the gift of right knowledge, which is a unique island on the path to final release, is the best one among them. For those beings who are swallowed up in the ocean of existences, the book is a boat. For those who have fallen in the well of bad states of existences, It is like a rope.
Now, third, it is also the best means to help others reach knowledge.
With the gift of knowledge, a creature recognizes what is good for him and what is bad. He knows the real, beginning with the sentient entity. The gift of knowledge helps a creature to obtain the splendid omniscience. Thus he grasps the whole world and can go to the edge of the universe. There exists nothing comparable to the gift of knowledge in this world in order to help all beings. Therefore, the wise man constantly applies himself with all his might to the gift of knowledge.
Not only were the texts meant to pass on the values of Jain teachings, but so were their illustrations. These images that are produced by the artisans that we have seen don't just decorate the page. They bring the teachings vividly to life by highlighting their most dramatic and memorable moments. I'll show you that in 3 powerful examples: the dream with the 14 auspicious objects, the marriage of Nemi, and the triumph of non-violence. The first illustration on this slide shows a well-known episode from the life of Jina Rishabha. Here, Queen Yashodevi, the mother of future Jina, is shown asleep, dreaming. In her dream, she sees 14 auspicious symbols, each one a sign that an extraordinary child is about to be born, one destined to become a Jina. The 14 auspicious dreams of the queen are on the top from the left and down. They are an elephant, a bull, a lion, the goddess Shri, a flower garland, a flag, a full pot, a lotus pond, the milky ocean, a divine palace, the moon, the sun, a heap of jewels, and a flame. And you see how the symbols are depicted clearly at the top of the image, and you can see how the painter has carefully arranged them in space, placing them just above the reclining queen to make them stand out. The second illustration shows a powerful moment from the life of the 22nd Jina, Nemi. On his way to marry Princess Rajimati, he suddenly realizes the depths of his mistake. Along the road, he sees animals that have been gathered for the wedding feast and hears their cries of suffering. This moment triggers a sudden awakening. Faced with the violence done in his name, he makes a life-changing decision to renounce the world and follow the path of non-violence. Note how the artist captures this transformation with striking symbolism. First, the horse of Prince Nemi is painted in black, representing the darkness of the act and the karmic burden it carries. Then, in contrast, the horse appears again, this time in white, symbolizing purity and the Jina refusal to take part in any act of harm. Isn't it effective? The third illustration depicts an episode from the life of Prince Yashodhara, a story that strongly condemns the violence of hunting, which was traditionally seen as a royal pastime. One day, the king, while carrying out his royal duties, set out on a hunting expedition. On his way to the forest, he passed a Jain monk named Sudatta. The king spent the day searching for game, but found nothing. As evening fell, he began the return journey empty-handed. Along the way, he again crossed paths with monk Sudatta. Blaming his failure on the monk's presence, the king, in a fit of anger, unleashed his hunting dogs on him. But something unexpected happened. As the dogs approached the monk, they stopped. Then, quietly, they lowered their heads, showing respect, not aggression. Once again, the artist uses the visual space to communicate the deeper message. The scene is divided into two parts. The lower sections shows the king's violent intent. The upper section reveals the dog's reverence for the monk, who stands calmly, embodying the Jain ideas of peace and non-violence. What better way to express the teaching of non-violence? Educational elements are present even in book covers. The same illustration of the 14 dreams we have seen just before appears on this cover in a slightly different order. But they are the 14 announcing a jina. Lastly, copying and illustrating manuscripts was not only an act of preservation, it was also a meaningful way to connect the lay community with the monastic order and to help transmit the core principles of Jain Dharma. Lay people sponsored the production of manuscripts as a form of religious merit, and monks or nuns chose the works for a specific purpose: doctrinal teaching, personal study, or the enrichments of their community's library. We see this dynamic clearly reflected at the end of the manuscript. Yes, so you see here in the first, even if I don't read everything, you see a patron that is a layman who ordered to copy a book for a nun. Then in the second, that is also a layman, but now that is for a group of monks, but they are described eager to deepen their knowledge, so probably for their study. And then in another example, we see that it is for the benefit of the entire fourfold Jain community. So that was monks, nuns, laymen, and laywomen. These lines remind us of something essential, that manuscript culture in Jainism was not just about putting words on a page. It was about service, about learning, about community, and ultimately about the path to liberation. And it still is. During a recent conference in Heidelberg, I met a Jain publisher from Delhi. And when I mentioned that I was working on medieval Jain literature and history, he kindly invited me to contribute to his publication series. And what resonated deeply with me was the way he described this work as an act of service to the Jain community, which beautifully reflects a long-standing tradition of manuscript preservation and the transmission of knowledge. As we have seen, Jains have long held manuscripts in the highest regard. This deep respect for the written word has in turn placed them at the forefront of preserving India's invaluable cultural heritage. We'll now see two examples only: their contribution to systems of knowledge and the importance of Jain literary works in Indian literature. So we see in Jain works that there are a lot of mundane science that are covered, and you see here the list: astrology, augury, knowledge of jewels, horses, elephants, body signs and riddles, alchemy and medicine. And in Hindu literature, what we have on that is works that are usually from the 1st century or dated from the 18th century. But there is nothing in between, so we can't date what is in Hindu literature. So as a result, Jain works, they work as a bridge between this data we have in Hindu literature, and they help reconstruct this system of Indian system of knowledge, like medicine or like so what I mentioned before. To take my second point, it is sometimes forgotten that Jain monks also composed long narrative works in refined Prakrit during the medieval periods. Texts that were admired in their time, carefully copied and passed down through generations. I won't go into detail here, but you can take a look at this overview here of some largely forgotten literary work, and you will see how extensive they are. So that means, for example, 10,000 lines, 12,000 lines, 15,000 lines. And when you remember that a scribe could write only about 60 lines a day, you begin to understand just how much they meant to members of the Jain community who have preserved them. Why? Oh, that has stopped again. So, why were they admired? So that I can tell you already. They are well written, so in a refined literary style. Their affairs were probably sung. They feel modern, and you will see sometimes you could believe that you read a novel of the 19th century, and then they teach the values of Jain teachings.
For this wedding, with its divine beauty and its happy-looking men and women in their finery, the city seemed like the divine world come down to earth. For this wedding, the gods, even if they move in the sky, remained motionless, contemplating all the beetle sellers hawking their wares. On this day, with the echoes it gave to the deep tones of the musical instruments, one would have thought that even the sky was celebrating a great festival, which made the people's joy extreme. On that day, with the fragrance of the many quivering camphor trees and the buzzing of the wandering bees, even the earth began to sing, and happiness grew. The town was charming with its rasaka and pretty chachari, sung by troops of rejoicing townswomen who devoted themselves to intoning blessings.
And probably they were singing the verses, because these texts, they are in prose and verse. So the prose was recited, but the verse sung. I take the opportunity to thank here the lady who read or sang these verses for me. That is the Dr. Pragat Jain from Pune, and also the PhD student who recommended her to me, that is Anchit Jain.
सिंगार हारि पमुया नर नारी गणेण सुरस रुवेणा अवयरियतियस लोया वपुरवरी जम्मि संजाया शैलम तंबोलकरम जणम निहालिन्ता चिट्ठन्ति निच्चला चंचला विगयणे जहिं खयरा गंभीर तूर गुंजिय पडम स्वयं नहयलम पितम मिदिणे वड्ढिय परमानंदम नज्जै परमोत्सवं कुणै रोलंत बहल कपूर परिमला भमिर भमर कयरोला संवड्ढियप्पमोया गायिया तम्मिधरणीवी आसीवाय परायण पुरंगणाणं गणेहि मुयेहि गिज्जन्त चारु चच्चरी रासय रम्मापुरी जाया एवं विह विच्छड्डे कय बहुकोड्डे पढ़न्त बहुडोड्डे दिसि दिसि विसट्ट नट्टे पमुइय चट्टे बहु पयट्टे पुह इचंद कुमारो निज्जिय मारो विवेय गुण सारो वट्टै मच्छथ मणो अरुठ तुठो जहा samno.
So now, when I said modern, that is, for example, in the story of Garland of Blue Water Lilies, that is the name of a princess, which is a love story between a prince and a princess, but at the same time a religious story showing how the heroes achieve spiritual progress through their lives until they reach liberation. Quite surprisingly, the author holds back the beginning of the story. So he feigns to have forgotten something, as you will hear.
This is the subject of the present tale. Hearken to it. There was once a region of the earth which was surrounded as if by a dazzling girdle by 4 oceans. Aha, but wait. I have forgotten something. Be indulgent toward me. Hearken, I pray you. What is this thing I have forgotten? Even if seen from the front, he is very handsome. Seen from behind, he is hideous. The poet fears the villainous man as much as he fears the elephant of the Vindhya mountains. And since I fear him, I am going to sing his praises a little. What is it that the wicked man is like? One might say that the wicked man is like a dog. He barks the first time that he sees someone and eats the flesh from their back. However, whereas a dog directs his barking against people he does not recognize and eats the flesh only of the dead, the villainous man will bark even in the face of his own mother and will eat the flesh from the back even of a living man who is still writhing and struggling.
So maybe I will pass this one.
Listen, good.
And also they conveyed the Jain teachings, which is the purpose of these romances. For example, just after the wedding scene that we have heard before, the monk warns his audience against all forms of frivolity.
In the midst of such generosity, in the midst of many wonders, in the midst of many recitations by bards, in the midst of successful dances, in the midst of rejoicing pupils, in the midst of events of every kind, Prince Prithvi Chandra, who had defeated the god of passion and possessed all the qualities of discernment, was seen to appear like a monk with an even temper, neither irritated nor enraptured. He said to himself, the frivolity of the folly that exists in the circle of existences is unfathomable. It makes people who do not know the fundamental realities gesticulate in vain. Singing is essentially dull verbiage. All that instrumental noise is nothing but exhaustion, and dancing is indistinguishable from hysterical excitement. The truth is that the soul is tired of wearing garlands and ornaments because the body is naturally ugly and cannot be beautiful.
So, undoubtedly, these romances are quite an achievement. As a result, they deserve recognition not only within the history of Jain literature, but also in the broader landscape of world literature. They should not, therefore, suffer from neglect in its various forms. First, there are fragile manuscripts, palm leaves that urgently need preservation. Second, many important works still remain unpublished. Third, when even the texts that have been published need better care and attention, since they are increasingly difficult to access. For example, many of them are held in only 1 or 2 libraries in all of Europe and the United States. To give another example, only a few have been translated into Hindi or Gujarati, and even fewer into English. Once students have gained an advanced knowledge of Prakrit, as well as a solid understanding of the Jain Dharma that permeates these texts, it will be possible to launch translation projects to bring such works into the broader fields of literary history and academic research. So, what to do next? Preserving and passing on the rich heritage of Jain culture will require a number of coordinated efforts in both research and teaching. First, preserving fragile manuscripts before they are lost to time. Second, digitizing existing editions and making them searchable through OCR technology so they can be accessed by scholars and students around the world. Third, translated more Jain texts and staging Jain plays, which are often ignored, not only to integrate them into mainstream academic discourse, but to give them the recognition they truly deserve. Fourth, attracting students to courses on Jainism and making those courses more visible and accessible. And finally, training students in Prakrit and Sanskrit while providing clear academic and professional pathways so their efforts lead somewhere meaningful. Summing up what I have tried to show you leads me to a conclusion. The rediscovery of forgotten works from Jain Bandas will make Toronto a global center for Jain studies. By carefully studying these texts, scholars can open new pathways into medieval Jain thought, art, and literature, sharing this rich intellectual heritage with the world and ensuring its vitality and preservation for future generations. Thank you very much for sharing this moment with me.
The incredibly specific techniques that were used, do you have any insight as to how they arrived at such specificity to ensure that they could come up with sustainable manuscripts? Because it seems like they would have had to do a great deal of thinking and testing to come up with that.
It's difficult to answer for the past because, that's why also I took one text for the techniques, but the text for the techniques is pretty late, so that is a text from the 15th century. We don't have exactly what is before. Probably also there were components so that they were avoiding what was linked to animals, and so they had to reflect upon the materials because they took mineral colors, and not things that would come from, for example, from shell or from things like that to have the red, or destroy plants to have the indigo. So that was a reason. But for the old techniques from the 10th century and so on, we don't have such testimonies. We see the text, and probably what helps now is the way you can analyze with modern technique what has been used and so on. But so I hope I answered a little bit.
Thank you for a very interesting lecture. Two short questions. Translating these Jain documents from Sanskrit and Prakrit is a tricky, difficult task. You cannot literally do the translation. Tell us about your experiences. And the related question is, you have long words, join words. So are the Germanic languages better suited to disjoin and understand and do the translation?
Alors, how can we translate this text? So, I mean, I have done that for the one called the Garland of Blue Water Lilies, so that is a huge task if you do that alone. Otherwise, we could do that as a teamwork. Now, for your questions of the translation, yeah, it is true that it's sometimes difficult, especially in the case where you have the play called Shlesha, which is double meaning. Then you have to decompose it a little bit to say just as the bee does that and the other one is doing that. So to make understand that the bee is like the prince, for example, because in the text you would have the bee prince, and then you would have the also the lotus face, and things. So you have to find tricks for that. The rest, what is interesting is also to have a very precise language, because they use precise words. And that is where you see that they had really, high literary training. And when they used a synonym that was not the same as the other word. And you can see the level of education of these medieval monks. So, but the palette of English is also nice, so you can choose several words. So, but for the technical terms, you have to find the right one and then to keep on throughout the text. If you want to give this idea out. So like, there are so many, but for example, usually even for moksha, you have several terms that will be mukti, that will be nirvriti. So each time I try to find a different word for that. One is deliverance, what would be liberation, because that is more the sense of action, with mukti and then moksha, the result, and nirvriti, that is more the extension. So, so to find this kind, to render justice to these works. I hope. Okay.
Hi, Dr. Christine. Thank you so much for this very insightful and detailed presentation. It's clear that you're very passionate about Jain manuscripts and that. Could you explain a little bit about how you got interested in all of this work? What? How you got interested in all of this work?
Oh, in all this? We will make this long story short. I have always been interested in ancient language, to tell you the truth, since I was a child. So I began with Latin and Greek. Then I had a professor who said, then you should see Sanskrit and so on. I said, oh, all right, why not? But then it was not possible before the university level. And then I discovered that there was not only Sanskrit, but also Prakrit. And through this, then I discovered the Jain texts and their culture. So it is more, through the languages that I discovered the culture, then I made friends with Jains and so, but that was not the other way around. So that's my story.
Thank you, Christine. Okay. My question could be a very long one, but please give me the short answer because I think they want to wrap up. So you talked about Hinduism, the early period and then the late period, and then the Jain scriptures sort of bridging the gap between the two. Can you elaborate on that connection then between Hinduism and Jainism, and why is it a separate entity on its own, so to speak?
I think that is one point where the Hindus, they did not take such a care to preserve their text as Jain did. And so that's why we have some, where it was preserved, that can be some haphazard, and so, and also in some regions where we have oldest testimonies, but then after that, nothing. And maybe the care was not so much to this kind of text as there would be for Mahabharata and things like that. And while we see that for several texts, and I didn't mention that to make it too long, the oldest commentary preserved, even from Hindu texts, they will be Jain. And that shows also the whole importance to the written culture Jains had. Maybe also it is linked to the religion, that a lot of Hindu teaching was transmitted orally, and then not so much attention was paid to the written word, but the Jains said we have to record the teachings of the Jina, and you see that already in the canon, so the old time. And so that could be an explanation. But the thing is that's very interesting, because then you can see the links. I have done that for two sciences, and that can show you things that you would not have imagined in between. And so, but probably, and that shows also that there were an exchange between the Hindu culture and Jain culture. It is not just one is in and is bullet, so there are interactions, and you can see action interactions also with the text. The Champu is, so that is this text in prose and verse. We see that there are answers from Hindu to Jains and vice versa. That was a way to gain the courtly culture. And so also to have the favors of a king or of an elite and so, and the Jains were very much part of it, yes.
Thank you. So thank you so much. So Professor Chojnacki, thank you so much for this. Thank you for this extremely edifying and interesting talk. I know there are other questions, but there is a lunch now. I think it's going to take them about 5 to 10 minutes to set up, so please stay for lunch. We will be having many other events at the temple. This is really a partnership that we want to cultivate. So watch the space. There will be other opportunities, as well as opportunities to interact with Professor Chojnacki. So thank you so much.